Hey everybody, it's Ken, and I am very, very excited to have Mr. John Snyder on. So, for any of you who have watched The Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone, this is the real Tulsa King. So, John and I met, and I went to one of his facilities that he bought downtown Tulsa because I was down there looking at one of our properties, and it was beautiful. Also, I'd seen some of the scenes in the actual show, The Tulsa King. And lo and behold, I run into John. He's like, I bought this building, and we started talking about how he started using historic tax credits and some of these historic building credits through some of these bonds. And I said, man, this would be a great topic for a lot of people because literally John's been a successful entrepreneur his whole life, but this was a little bit new for him, and he's been replicating this over and over and over. So welcome to the show, John.
Thank you.
I thought it was a fascinating story. So can you kind of walk us through how this progressed? Because at this point, you literally are buying blocks of downtown using the same model.
Well, I am a Texas A&M building construction graduate, and right out of Texas A&M, I went to work for a construction company, a big national construction company called Manhattan Construction Company, and moved to Houston when they had hundreds of tower cranes and they were just building everywhere. And so I started the very bottom as a field engineer, carpenter, foreman, operator, all that stuff. I was there 30 years, and in the last 10 years I was there, I was president of the company. So my wife and I, we have 3 daughters. I have 10 grandkids. We all live here in Tulsa, just right around downtown Tulsa. And we moved here in 1995 from Houston. And I was a girls' soccer coach with 2 of my daughters. And one of the young girls on my team, her dad, his name was Bruce Robson, and his father loaned Sam Walton the money to start Walmart with. They were out of Claremore, Oklahoma. And so one day we were coming back from a soccer tournament in Sapulpa, and Bruce's daughter pointed at downtown Tulsa, this ugly, dilapidated 20-some story building, and she goes, my dad owns that building. And so I saw Bruce at practice a couple of weeks later, and I said, hey, you own that building? And he goes, yeah, it's the Mayo Hotel. He goes, I'm embarrassed to own it. And he said, can you go look at it with me? And I walked it and that, and then Tulsa was it was a low water mark of Tulsa. I mean, people came to work here and then they left. Nobody really lived downtown. I mean, it was really depressing and very dangerous at night. So we had 2 bond issues. The second bond issue did not pass, and it was to rejuvenate the Tulsa area, mainly downtown. And so Bruce Robson and I went to have a beer, and as we were leaving, he pushes the button on the elevator and asked me, he goes, do you have $1? And I go, yeah, I got $1. So I gave him $1, and he said, you just bought the Mayo Hotel. And I said, Bruce, you're drunk. This is true. And I said, you're drunk? He goes, hell no, I'm bringing you the keys tomorrow morning. And so 8 o'clock in the morning, he's calling me and he gave me the keys. So this was in March of 2001. And, my wife and I, she was in law school, and, I have my 3 kids in private school and working and, all the expenses and stuff. So it was difficult to cobble up, $250,000 cash at that time. And so I said, well, can we close at the end of the year? He said, yeah, no problem. So he goes, but you're taking the building right now. And so it's a 300,000 square foot, 22-story old hotel that was falling apart, built in 1925. My wife and I, we bought it. We ended up buying the parking garage across the street from him. It got so close where we were going to just, that beautiful lobby that you walked in, you and I and those other guys, we were just going to pour a ramp and spray fluorescent paint on the marble and start parking cars on the first floor. That's how bad things were. So in 2008, I met a guy that I was doing a big condo job with out of Dallas. We just split the baby. We were construction partners, development partners, and we did a $42 million renovation on the Mayo Hotel, and we opened it in 2010. We sold our federal tax credits to Chevron, the oil company, And then we sold our state tax credit. In Oklahoma, there's a transferable credit. So we sold that to a syndicate of insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield, people like that. And so those tax credits, Chevron was almost $9 million. The state transferable state tax credit, our proceeds were maybe 8.6 million, something like that. So we took the almost 9, the 8.6, we had a $4.9 million zero interest loan that we had to, it was a balloon payment in 10 years with the city of Tulsa. And then I contributed the building to our new partnership, and then we borrowed $23.5 million. So did all the construction. I brought in a lot of my casino subcontractors that were used to doing things fast and loading the job up. 76 apartments that we own, that we rent, 102 hotel rooms, and lots of banquet space, a big crystal ballroom and things like that. So
yeah, well, thank you for that story. I got the tax credit thing. How did you figure that out? Because you sold a federal and a state, and how did you know how to do that? How did that process work?
There's a 20% federal tax credit that applies to every state in the United States. It's all through the National Park Service in DC. There's a 6-inch book with all of it, but it's all online, and it'll tell you everything of what's a qualified expense, what your period to do the renovation is, how you can handle the tax credit, and the recapture period, some of the things that I'll get to. And then it tells you about construction techniques, about not sandblasting, not doing demolition in the building, and the approvals through the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service. So what I did was I looked, it was kind of like the federal credit applies to every state, but not every state, when I first started it, had a matching state tax credit. And so if you're looking to do a tax credit project and your state doesn't have a matching state tax credit, I would say don't do it, because the federal credit is 20% of your qualified rehabilitation expense, which is called QRE. And so you got 20% paid there, and you got 20% of the state matching tax credit like we have in Oklahoma. In Texas, it's 25%. In Louisiana, it's 25%. So we have an apartment building that we opened about 5 years ago. It's an old historic courthouse that we put apartments in. And our federal and Texas state credit, 45% of our cost was covered. So when you start running the numbers on that kind of tells you maybe you don't want to go build a brand new apartment building.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to go big, then you just go buy a bigger historic building. But that's kind of how it works. But I was looking in 2022, because I always thought California was like off limits. But I did some research before this. And in 2022, the state of California passed a matching state tax credit. And then they allotted $50 million to fund that. So it's a transferable credit. I think in Arizona, I think it's up in the legislature right now. So, if you see some old buildings and, that you can pick up cheap, especially, okay, so kind of going back a little bit, the way it works, you have to have, there's 3 parts to it. It's the part 1. So you go buy a building in a historic neighborhood that's already on the National Register. Say it's like a part of your downtown, like we have the Old Capitol Historic District.
Right.
So every building in that historic district qualifies for the part 1. So it's already listed. If the district is listed with the National Park Service, then that building inside the district qualifies has the part 1. So there's 3 parts to it. If you go buy another building that, you just see that it's already listed in National Park Service, those kind of things, those are nice to buy. So the way it works is you have a building, it has to be an approved part 1 on the National Park Service Historic Register. And then the part two is you decide what you're going to do with the building. And so, you hire an architect, you try to, number one, you want to put apartments. That doesn't work. Then hotels good. Office, I don't think that's that good right now. But say apartments, that's what we really like to do. We have 3 hotels, but we have several apartment buildings, and those always do real well. So the architect draws it up, and then you submit. He does what they call a part 2 application. You have a historic tax credit consultant helping you. What I do is I have my brother who does all my historic tax credit stuff. And then I have an architect, a local architect that does all of our work in Oklahoma and in Texas. And then you put it all together, and then you submit that to the State Historic Preservation Office. So there's one, every state has one of those. And then they look through it all. They come out, look at the property, see, what the existing condition is. They probably have photos of the building before you even bought the building, so they can know what the extent of the demolition that was done before you bought the building. And then they may have some questions. They may want some tweaks in your design. And then once you get the part 2 approved by the State Historic Preservation Office, then they send it to the National Park Service in DC. And the National Park Service looks at it. They may have a couple questions. Then you answer those questions and they approve it. So the way to do it is you got the part 1 and then you got the part 2, but you don't start construction until you got the part 2. You don't really even go get your loan and everything and just, pull the trigger until you have that part 2. Then you go ahead and do all the construction. And you need to make sure that your contractor, or your own contractor, that you don't make any changes. You can't make any changes. And if you're like changing your mind, I always recommend make your mind up and don't make any changes. If you want to make changes, then we'll go buy another building and you can go ahead and do those changes on that building. But it's very important that you deliver that finished product exactly the way the drawings and the specifications of the part 2 are. But you have to be completely finished before you can call in for your part 3 from the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service. But if you have a temporary certificate of occupancy and your income producing, then you can claim that federal credit on your tax year of that year that you got your occupancy permit.